Welcome to the 101st edition of the Hauger History Podcast, this one for United States history class. We're checking out a review for the Constitution and all the way up through the beginnings of the Civil War conflict. With me today is Jake. Jake, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Did I get the name right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Cool. We came up with a fake name and I already forgot it. That's how much I'm paying attention, which is really a good place to start with the podcast. So with these notes, compare them with your own and review them, come in ready to talk about how the new nation was struggling but also expanding. The first problem is that we didn't have a constitution. So once we defeated the British, we were really fearful of one thing. We didn't want our government to be too much like
The king and
Yeah.
how they're tyrannic.
Absolutely. And because of that, we made a weak government, which actually set up a lot of problems that were going to be really hazardous for the nation. And one of them was Daniel Shays and his rebellion. Do you remember much about us going over Shays Rebellion, what the significance of it was?
Well, basically what happened was a farmer was mad because he fought in the war and he wasn't being paid for fighting. So he got mad and led a revolt. I believe it was swiftly put down by
That's
Washington.
right. Yeah, basically, he wanted to be a small farmer and just live out his life peacefully in Massachusetts. He didn't have the money. He went into debtor's prison. And so here you had, like you said, a veteran, someone who had fought for the country and who didn't have any property, so he couldn't vote. So he couldn't even determine his own future. And other farmers took up arms. It was put down fairly quickly. 1,200 farmers took up arms. It also worried landowners this might upset the balance between the rich and the poor. And the government didn't have any laws that could control or help penalize or get this under control. So Shays and his men lost the battle. Some of them were given the death penalty. And this showed that Congress couldn't help, the government couldn't help, and the country needed a stronger governing document, which was the Constitution. Now, right from the start, right from the preamble, the first part of the Constitution, the United States set out the goals for government. So that's one of our multiple choice questions is, what does it determine? It's just setting the goals for this document. What do we want the nation to be like? And, of course, the father of the Constitution was no one else but
James Madison.
That's good. It's almost like he read it off a screen or read my mind. And both are true. Both are helpful. So that's a lot of fun. You already talked about how we feared Britain. We're rolling right along. And so the states wanted to guarantee rights. All state constitutions included equality, freedom, and democracy. It set up a system of checks and balances. And one of the big debates was whether the government should be powerful or the state should be more powerful. Well, it should be a strong central federal government, which were the Federalists, and the people who opposed that were anti-Federalists. So the anti-Federalists said, we are not going to pass the Constitution. We will not ratify it unless you give us what?
The Bill of Rights.
Yeah, you've got to protect the rights of people because they were, again, so scared that the president would be like a king and that they would slowly take away the rights of people and say they were going to be promised, but they wouldn't be anywhere in writing. So the anti-Federalists said it's got to be in there or we will not agree to ratify. And so that was ultimately the agreement. Did the rights, though, did they apply to everybody at first?
Not at first. I believe they only applied to land-owning white males.
Basically, you didn't have any power, so didn't apply to women, didn't apply to African Americans, didn't apply to Native Americans. So even though our country has always had these principles in writing, they haven't always practically applied to people. So that's something that I felt was important and wanted to make sure that I included, and probably other students listen to this too, so your teachers are probably talking about that as well. They included in the Constitution this elastic clause. They saw that in the future, we're going to have a lot of problems, issues, questions, and we need to make it necessary and proper for the Constitution to let lawmakers make laws for the future. So that's the elastic clause, being able to fundamentally change, shift, and make new laws for new decades and generations. So then we talked about delegated, reserved powers, and concurrent powers. Do you remember we made that little flip chart? We made little 3 columns. What were concurrent powers? What is that about? What does that mean?
Well, they're powers that are shared between the state and the federal government. These include like taxing and
maintaining roads,
Yeah.
Healthcare systems, law enforcement. Very good. Nice memory. But the time we're talking about, like, most of people in America were what? What was their occupation? Farming.
Subsistence farming.
Subsistence farming, yeah, just growing enough to survive. I like showing the Simpsons clip of Tobacco because I just like the Simpsons, and wherever I can, I try to slip in fun stuff. But yeah, we were a nation of small farmers, and we were having growing tensions over slavery. And a lot of the states were hoping to gain popular sovereignty. Do you remember what that concept was? We went over it yesterday.
It's basically the state's right to make its own decisions.
That's right. To self-determine, to be able to decide for themselves whether it was going to be a slave state or not. This is good. See, I know even without the screen on, you would remember because you've been participating in these discussions and how important they are in class. So every time we admitted states, we had this fundamental issue of slavery, right?
Yep.
So we admitted a lot of states in twos. Why did we do that?
Well, it's to maintain a balance between slave states and free states, to make sure that there's no one in government that has the upper hand.
That's exactly right. Very well said. Yeah, we were nervous that we were going to be this teetering balance of war if we didn't keep everybody calm. But unfortunately, it didn't really please everyone. It kind of made everyone upset because you were frequently getting more and more upset, which was kind of an interesting thing. So we get to 1850 and the Compromise of 1850. The North admits California as a free state. And at the same time, what did they pass to make sure that slave-owning people wouldn't get too upset?
The Fugitive Slave Act.
Yeah, what did that do?
It basically made it the people of like the North and the South. Well, basically it made them their responsibility to return runaway slaves.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about this in class, like I like to think that I'm a fun-loving teacher. I like to goof around, but we kind of have to be serious when we do this stuff. Why do you think that learning about these particular units, these chapters, are important? It's not really a question that's on the test. I just wonder, like, why do you think this is significant?
Well, I feel like it's important to realize that we have done wrong things in our past. We look at our history and we go, yeah, we did really good as a country, but we also messed up along the way, and we need to recognize that, yes, we did make mistakes. We're not perfect.
Interesting. Kind of makes me think that, like, when we study the past, we can't ignore the things that were negative or difficult because they were part of what made us who we are today, too. Very nicely said. So the Fugitive Slave Act forced anyone who was aware of runaway slaves to return them and report them, placed a bounty on a lot of different runaway slaves. It also, unfortunately, made it so people could be falsely accused without any evidence and arrested and sometimes returned into slavery.
Because they weren't given due process.
Yeah, which is really tough. And you had a lot of questions about that. You were curious, and you, I think, were really aware of how difficult or unfair or dangerous it would have been to be free at the time, because without anyone but somebody witnessing and swearing that you were property, you could be taken away and all of your freedom could be gone. People started to become more aware of this and the issues of slavery through a novel that became one of the first top sellers by an American author, which was
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yep, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. 300,000 copies in 3 months, over 1 million copies in its first year. And through that conversation and the Dred Scott case, where lawyers determined that African Americans were not citizens and didn't have the right to sue in court, Americans start to really become aware on a national scale. And with newspapers coming out for the first time nationwide, people are reading, talking, spending their free time discussing this issue, which they weren't before. And that kind of accelerated the pace towards realizing that this issue wasn't going away and it wasn't getting any easier. The trends in the country. There were new religious movements spreading across, social reforms, industrial revolution was happening in full spring, the increase in federal power, nationalism, and the pride of being American, and so we moved west. We started expanding and with the goal of inhabiting the entire continent from sea to shining sea. We established the Pony Express, and we're carrying mail back and forth and have colonies of people in different places, and Americans are starting to live all over the nation. 250,000 people go west, and then you get pictures like Albert Bierstadt and other paintings and propaganda to try to get people to move to Oregon, showing the ideal, picturesque, beautiful, and it is a nice place. Have you been to Oregon?
I have. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life.
How did you feel about living there?
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's a great place.
It's great.
This West Coast has so much to offer
It really does.
for people in a lot of different ways, and that's why people started moving west. Plus, they discovered gold in 1848, and that brought tens of thousands of people here. So, wow, what a unit. I mean, like, we covered 100 years, basically, and we do start becoming great and powerful and wealthy and rich, and at the same time, people are struggling with civil rights, equality, and trying to gain the right to survive. So it's kind of complex, but I don't know why. It's one of my favorite units. It just like feels like a glimpse of America in one piece. Jake, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah. We'll see you on the next edition. Probably have more fun next time, too. Until next time, study hard, do well, review this, and we'll see you in class. Until next time, class is dismissed.